Rahim Ahmed woke up to the soft sound of birds chirping outside his small London flat. The morning light seeped through the curtains as he prepared for another ordinary day. Rahim had come to the UK years ago, chasing a dream of providing a better life for his family back in Pakistan. Hardworking and kind-hearted, he had built a life he was proud of, working long hours at a local grocery store and saving every penny he could. He was sipping his tea, scrolling through photos of his niece's birthday party from the night before. A small smile crossed his face as he remembered the joy on her face when she blew out the candles. Just then, a loud knock at the door shattered the quiet moment. "Mr. Rahim Ahmed," a deep voice called from the other side. Confused, Rahim put down his cup and opened the door. Standing there were two police officers, their serious expressions catching him off guard. Behind them, neighbors peeked out of their windows, curiosity lighting up their faces. "Yes, I am Rahim," he replied politely. "Is something wrong?" "We need to talk to you about a robbery that took place last night," one of the officers said, his voice cold and direct. Rahim's heart sank. "A robbery? What do you mean?" "You were seen near the location of the crime," the officer stated. "We have evidence that matches your description." Rahim blinked, unable to believe what he was hearing. There must be some mistake. "I wasn't there. I was at my brother's house for a birthday party all night." The officers exchanged glances, their doubt written across their faces. "You'll have a chance to explain yourself at the station. Please come with us." Rahim's neighbors were now openly watching the scene unfold. He felt a wave of shame wash over him. "But I haven't done anything wrong," he protested. His voice cracked, but he tried to stay calm. Ignoring his words, the officers stepped inside and began looking around. Rahim stood helplessly as they searched his flat, picking up items and jotting down notes. After a few tense moments, they signaled for him to follow them. As Rahim was escorted to the police car, his mind raced. He couldn't understand how this was happening. Why would the police suspect him of a crime he didn't commit? What evidence did they have? The stares from his neighbors felt heavier than ever, and he could already feel their judgment pressing down on him. As the car drove away, Rahim looked out the window at the life he had worked so hard to build. In an instant, it felt like everything was slipping away, and he didn't know how to stop it. Inside the car, he whispered to himself, "This is just a misunderstanding. They'll realize the truth. They have to." But deep down, fear began to creep into his heart. Would they? Rahim sat quietly in the back of the police car as it moved through the streets of London. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He kept replaying the officer's words in his mind. "How could I be accused of something I didn't do?" He tried to reassure himself, but fear crept in like a shadow. At the station, Rahim was led into a cold, plain room with a single table and two chairs. The walls felt like they were closing in. After a few minutes, two officers entered, carrying a file. One of them, a stern-faced man, introduced himself as Detective Foster. "Mr. Ahmed," Detective Foster began, his voice sharp. "You were seen near the scene of a robbery last night. Do you deny this?" Rahim frowned, his confusion deepening. "Yes, I deny it. I was at my brother's house all evening. We were celebrating my niece's birthday. There are many people who can confirm this." The detective opened the file and slid a grainy photo across the table. Rahim stared at it, his heart sinking further. The image showed a man walking near the scene of the robbery, wearing a jacket that looked similar to his own. The face in the photo was blurred and unclear. "That could be anyone," Rahim said firmly. "You can't even see the face." Detective Foster leaned back in his chair. "We found a witness who said they saw someone who looks like you in the area. And this jacket," he pointed to the photo, "matches the one you were wearing this morning." Rahim shook his head, frustration bubbling to the surface. "This is a mistake. My brother and his family can confirm I was with them the whole evening. Please, check with them." The detective exchanged a glance with the officer beside him. "We'll look into your alibi," he said flatly. "But for now, we need to hold you here for further questioning." Rahim's stomach sank. The idea of staying in the station, treated as a criminal, was unbearable. "I didn't do this," he said again, his voice firmer now. "Please believe me." But the detective didn't respond. Instead, he picked up the file and left the room, leaving Rahim alone with his thoughts. Minutes felt like hours as Rahim waited, his mind racing. He thought about his family, his brother, his niece, and the life he had built. Would they believe him? What would people say? He didn't even want to think about how his neighbors had already looked at him with suspicion. Finally, another officer entered and informed Rahim that he would remain at the station until further notice. The words hit him like a hammer. He tried to stay calm, but the uncertainty was overwhelming. As Rahim sat in that cold, empty room, one thought echoed in his mind. How did I end up here? And how will I prove my innocence? The next morning, Rahim sat in the holding area of the police station, feeling exhausted. Sleep had eluded him all night as he replayed the events in his mind. He kept telling himself this was a mistake, a misunderstanding that would soon be cleared up. But deep down, the fear of being trapped in this nightmare refused to leave. Meanwhile, outside the station, something Rahim never imagined was happening. News about his arrest was spreading. Reporters gathered outside, their cameras ready to capture every detail. The story of a local robbery suspect had made its way to the headlines, and Rahim's name was now tied to it. Suspect identified in bold London robbery, one article read. Another headline screamed, immigrant man held for questioning in high-profile crime. Back in his neighborhood, Rahim's family was dealing with their own shock. His brother, Karim, was on the phone, frantically trying to call the police and explain Rahim's alibi. He was with us the whole night, Karim told anyone who would listen. But it felt like his words fell on deaf ears. Outside their home, neighbors whispered to one another. Some were sympathetic, saying, "Rahim's such a kind man. He couldn't have done this." But others were quick to judge. "You never really know people, do you?" one neighbor muttered. At the police station, Rahim was taken into a new room for more questioning. This time, Detective Foster placed a newspaper on the table in front of him. Rahim's heart sank when he saw his name in bold letters under a photo of the police station. "You've made the news, Mr. Ahmed," Foster said, his tone neutral. "People are asking questions." Rahim felt a wave of anger rise. "Why is my name out there when you haven't even proven anything?" "This is ruining my life," he said, his voice trembling with frustration. Foster raised an eyebrow. "That's how the media works. They like a good story, and unfortunately for you, you're part of it." Rahim clenched his fists but forced himself to stay calm. "I don't care about the media. I just want you to look at the facts. Talk to my family. Check the cameras near my brother's house. You'll see I wasn't there." The detective sighed. "We're working on it, but these things take time." As the day wore on, Rahim's story continued to spread. Social media posts speculated about his guilt, with strangers sharing opinions based on half-truths and assumptions. Rahim's name became a trending topic, but not in a way he would have ever wanted. By the end of the day, Rahim sat back in the holding cell, staring at the floor. His mind was heavy with worry. Not only was he fighting to prove his innocence, but now he had to deal with the public judging him without even knowing the full story. As Rahim closed his eyes, he silently vowed, "I will not let this break me. I will prove I'm innocent, no matter how long it takes." As the days passed, Rahim felt trapped. The police continued to question him, but nothing changed. His alibi, his brother, his niece, the people who had seen him, seemed to hold no weight. The police officers would listen, nod, but then carry on with their investigation as if Rahim's words meant nothing. It was frustrating and confusing, but Rahim refused to give up. Meanwhile, outside the walls of the police station, something else was happening. The media storm around Rahim's case was growing. More stories were published, speculating about his involvement in the robbery. Some people believed he was guilty, others didn't. But what no one knew was that there was someone else who fit the description of the real suspect, someone the police hadn't even considered. Gareth Walker was a name that had been mentioned in passing by a few of Rahim's neighbors. Gareth was a local troublemaker, someone with a reputation for petty crimes, always getting into small legal problems, but never facing serious consequences. People around the neighborhood knew him, and most tried to avoid him. But to the police, Gareth was just another name on a list. They hadn't taken him seriously as a suspect. For the police, the case seemed clear. They had evidence that pointed towards Rahim. The jacket in the blurry CCTV footage, the witness who said they saw someone who looked like him. It all seemed to line up in their minds. But what the police didn't know was that Gareth, the real thief, had been operating in plain sight, almost mocking the authorities. Gareth had a history of escaping justice. He knew how to stay under the radar, using his connections and charm to manipulate people into believing his lies. This time, he had convinced an unreliable friend to provide him with an alibi, which had been enough to keep him off the police's radar. But Rahim, an honest man who had never been in trouble with the law, was now paying the price for it. As Rahim sat in his cell, thoughts swirling in his head, he couldn't help but wonder why the police had been so quick to accuse him. Had they not even looked into Gareth? It was as if they had made up their minds about him before even considering the possibility of someone else being involved. Then, as if by chance, the real break in the case came. Emily Carter, the lawyer Rahim had hired, had been looking through the police records when she found something odd. A new witness had come forward, a man who had seen Gareth near the scene of the robbery, acting suspiciously. The man remembered the details of Gareth's appearance, and it matched perfectly with the description of the robber. Emily wasted no time. She immediately contacted the police and shared the new information. As the details of the new evidence came to light, the police had no choice but to reconsider their focus. But even then, they hesitated, still too wrapped up in their assumptions about Rahim. Rahim, though, finally saw a glimmer of hope. He had known all along that he was innocent, and now, with this new lead, he felt a spark of belief growing inside him. Maybe, just maybe, the truth was finally starting to come to light. The days felt longer than ever for Rahim. Each morning, he would wake up in the cold holding cell, hoping today would be the day he'd finally be free. But each day passed with no new developments. The police seemed content with their assumptions, ignoring his repeated insistence that he was innocent. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was stuck in an endless loop of frustration and helplessness. Then, finally, something changed. Rahim's lawyer, Emily Carter, was persistent. She was a woman who believed in justice, even when it seemed impossible. She had been tirelessly reviewing his case, trying to find any clue that could clear his name. Emily was different from the police. She actually listened to Rahim, and she believed in him. This made a world of difference. Emily spent hours digging through the police reports and surveillance footage. She spoke to Rahim's brother, Karim, and asked him to help gather statements from the guests who had attended the birthday party. The more Emily looked, the more she realized that Rahim's case had holes. The CCTV footage wasn't clear enough to identify anyone with certainty, and the witness who had pointed to Rahim seemed to have made a mistake. One afternoon, Emily took a step that made Rahim feel both hopeful and nervous. She went to the police station to speak directly with Detective Foster. Emily was determined to show the police that Rahim was not the man they were looking for. "I need you to look at the facts again," Emily said calmly, sitting across from the detective. "Rahim's alibi is solid. His brother and the people who were at the party can confirm it. There is no real evidence that links him to the crime scene." Detective Foster didn't look convinced. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "You're asking us to believe something we don't have proof for. The jacket, the witness, it all points to Rahim." Emily didn't back down. "I understand you have a theory, Detective, but it's based on assumptions, not facts. What about the new witness who came forward? Have you even looked into that? Or are you too busy focusing on a man who hasn't done anything wrong? The detective paused. Emily had a point. The new witness had described someone else at the scene of the robbery, someone who wasn't Rahim. Emily's voice softened but remained firm. Please, for the sake of justice, take another look at the evidence. I know you're just doing your job, but you need to consider all possibilities. There was a long silence. Rahim, sitting outside the room, waited anxiously. He could hear the muffled voices of Emily and Detective Foster discussing the case, but it was hard to know what was happening behind closed doors. Minutes later, Emily walked out of the office, a slight smile on her face. "We've made progress," she said, her voice filled with relief. "The detective is going to follow up on the new lead. This could finally turn the case around." Rahim felt a rush of hope. For the first time in days, he felt like he had a chance to prove his innocence. Emily's determination was something he couldn't ignore. She had given him a reason to believe that, with enough effort, he could clear his name and get back to his life. But as Rahim looked at Emily, one thought remained in his mind. Would it be enough? The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Rahim sat anxiously as Emily continued to push for justice. The detective, after much persuasion, had agreed to reinvestigate the case, but Rahim still wasn't sure what that meant for him. Every time he thought things were moving forward, he felt as though they were slipping backward again. Emily worked tirelessly, reaching out to everyone she could think of. She talked to Rahim's friends, asking if they had seen anything unusual. She reviewed every single piece of evidence the police had gathered, hoping something would stand out. One afternoon, as Rahim sat in his small apartment, he received a call from Emily. His heart raced. He hadn't expected to hear from her so soon. "Rahim," she said, her voice sounding more upbeat than usual. "I found something." Rahim's mind went blank for a moment. "What do you mean? What did you find?" "I was going through the CCTV footage again," Emily explained, "and I noticed something strange. There's a second camera that the police didn't bother looking at. It wasn't pointed directly at the crime scene, but it captured footage of a man leaving the alley right after the robbery took place. And guess what?" Rahim felt a spark of hope. "What?" "It's not you, Rahim. It's Gareth Walker, the man who was actually near the scene." Rahim could hardly believe what he was hearing. Gareth. The same Gareth that no one even considered. "Yes," Emily replied, "the same one. I went back to the original witness, and it turns out they remember seeing someone who matched Gareth's description. His jacket, his height, his general appearance, all of it fits perfectly." Rahim felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Finally, the truth was coming out. Finally, the real suspect was being uncovered. Emily didn't stop there. She spoke with more witnesses who had seen Gareth near the scene. It became clearer by the hour that Rahim wasn't the one who should have been in the police station all this time. Over the next few days, the evidence piled up. The new witness accounts were consistent. The footage from the second camera clearly showed Gareth walking away from the crime scene. Rahim had no connection to it whatsoever. Meanwhile, Rahim's name continued to circulate in the media. Some people were still hesitant to believe his innocence, but many others were beginning to see things differently. Public opinion was starting to shift in his favor. Finally, Detective Foster had no choice but to bring Gareth in for questioning. Rahim was allowed to return home after spending days in the station without any concrete answers. As Rahim stepped out of the police station, a feeling of freedom washed over him, but there was still a lingering unease. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. The truth was finally being heard. But would the public, and even his own neighbors, ever see him the same way again? Only time would tell. For now, Rahim focused on the one thing that mattered most: clearing his name and finding peace. He had fought for his innocence, and now he could only hope that the truth would finally shine through. Rahim stood in front of his apartment, staring at the door. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. The police had finally started to believe the truth, and the pressure he had been carrying was starting to lift. But as he thought about the last few weeks, the time he had spent locked up, the judgment from his neighbors, and the constant worry about his future, he couldn't help but wonder if everything would return to normal. Outside, the media was still buzzing with stories about him. The headlines had shifted. Instead of calling him a suspect, they now spoke of him as a victim of a wrongful arrest. It was a small comfort, but it didn't change what he had gone through. What bothered him most was the way some people still looked at him with suspicion, as if the accusations would always follow him. Emily, his lawyer, had been working relentlessly to clear his name. After the new evidence surfaced, the footage showing Gareth leaving the scene, the new witness statements, Emily had arranged a press conference. She believed it was time to set the record straight once and for all. Rahim wasn't sure about speaking publicly. He had never wanted any of this attention, but Emily insisted it was necessary. The truth had to be told, and the public needed to hear it from him directly. He agreed, although he couldn't help but feel nervous about facing the reporters and cameras. The press conference was set for the next morning. As Rahim arrived at the venue, his heart raced. The room was full of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones everywhere. Emily stood beside him, calm and collected, ready to speak on his behalf. Rahim cleared his throat and stepped up to the podium, looking out at the sea of faces in front of him. It felt surreal to be standing there, knowing how much had changed in such a short time. For weeks, he had been living in fear of losing everything. Now, he had a chance to make things right. "I want to thank everyone for giving me the chance to speak today," Rahim began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "What has happened to me over the past few weeks has been difficult, to say the least. I have been accused of something I didn't do. My life was turned upside down, and my name was tarnished. But I want to make one thing clear. I did not commit the robbery." There was a pause as the room grew silent. Rahim took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room of reporters. "I was with my family the night of the crime. I have witnesses who can confirm that. I'd always tried to live an honest life, and I would never hurt anyone. But because of a mistake, I became a suspect." Rahim's words hung in the air, and he could see that some of the reporters were taking notes, while others exchanged glances. The tension in the room was thick, but Rahim pushed forward. "I want to thank my lawyer, Emily Carter, for never giving up on me. She believed in me when no one else would." Emily smiled faintly as Rahim continued. "I also want to thank the people who have supported me. My family, my friends, and even those who didn't judge me too quickly. The truth has finally come out. Gareth Walker is the one who should have been arrested." A few reporters raised their hands, eager to ask questions, but Rahim had already said what he needed to. He wasn't interested in answering anything that could bring up painful memories. The public had heard the truth, and that was enough. As Rahim left the press conference, the weight on his shoulders seemed a little lighter. The media had finally told his side of the story, and he had taken a step toward rebuilding his life. But deep inside, Rahim knew that the journey wasn't over. He had to prove to the world, and to himself, that the truth could always prevail. Rahim walked out of the police station, feeling the weight of the last few weeks slowly lifting from his shoulders. The press conference had been a success. The truth had finally been shared, and for the first time, he felt a sense of relief. Yet there was still a part of him that felt unsure, still haunted by the way people had looked at him during the ordeal. The damage done to his reputation couldn't be undone overnight, but Rahim was determined to rebuild. The police had released a statement later that day, acknowledging the mistake and apologizing for wrongly accusing Rahim. Detective Foster, who had once been so certain of Rahim's guilt, was now a part of the team that had to investigate Gareth Walker. Rahim couldn't help but wonder how the detective felt now, after everything had unfolded. But he didn't have time to dwell on that. What mattered now was clearing his name and moving forward. Emily, Rahim's lawyer, had been a constant support throughout the ordeal. She was there when the media coverage had been overwhelming, and she stood by him when the police seemed to ignore the truth. Emily had worked tirelessly to make sure that Rahim's side of the story was heard, and now she was ready to help him through the final steps of clearing his name. As Gareth Walker was brought in for questioning, Rahim felt a mix of emotions: anger, disbelief, and a sense of relief all blended together. He had known for days, even weeks, that the real criminal had been out there, free and unpunished. But now, at last, Gareth would face the consequences of his actions. The investigation into Gareth's involvement in the robbery went quickly once the new evidence came to light. The second CCTV camera footage, the witness testimonies, and the connections between Gareth and the crime scene all added up. Within days, the police had enough to charge Gareth with the robbery. Rahim, the man who had been wrongly accused, would finally be free to live his life without the constant shadow of suspicion hanging over him. For Rahim, this moment was both a victory and a reminder of the pain he had gone through. He couldn't simply forget the sleepless nights, the hurtful looks from his neighbors, and the feeling of being trapped in a nightmare. But the most important thing was that the truth had won out in the end. As Rahim sat in his apartment that evening, he looked around at the life he had worked so hard to build. He knew things would never be the same. The world had changed for him, and it would take time to rebuild the trust that had been lost. But he was determined to try. Rahim smiled softly, knowing that no matter what happened in the future, he had fought for what was right. And with that, Rahim could finally begin to move forward. The nightmare was over, and a new chapter in his life had just begun. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but as long as he had his family, his lawyer, and his own strength, he would face whatever came next with courage and determination. Justice had been served, and Rahim was ready to reclaim his life. As the weeks passed after Rahim's release, life slowly began to return to a semblance of normal. The media frenzy had died down, but Rahim still felt the lingering effects of his time in the spotlight. The public's view of him had changed, and it wasn't always easy to bear. Some people looked at him with sympathy, while others still whispered about his arrest. He could tell that some neighbors still viewed him with doubt, even though the police had cleared his name. But Rahim refused to let it control them. He spent time with his family, trying to rebuild the bond that had been strained during the difficult weeks of his arrest. His brother, Karim, had stood by him from the beginning, always believing in his innocence. Rahim was grateful for his family's support and love. His niece's birthday party, the very event that had become his alibi, was something he cherished even more now. He made a promise to himself that he would never take his family for granted again. As he reflected on the events that had unfolded, Rahim realized that his journey hadn't just been about proving his innocence. It had been about understanding the flaws in the system, about seeing how quickly someone's life could be turned upside down based on assumptions. He had been accused not because of solid evidence, but because of circumstantial details and a hasty judgment. Rahim thought about the mistakes made by the police. They had ignored the possibility of a real suspect because they had already decided he was guilty. They hadn't taken the time to fully investigate all the evidence, and it had cost him dearly. The police had failed to properly consider the second CCTV camera footage, the new witness statements, and the signs that pointed away from him. It had taken a great deal of time and effort for Emily, his lawyer, to get the truth out, but she had done it. But Rahim didn't hold any grudges. He knew that mistakes were made, and it was important to look ahead rather than dwell on the past. He understood that the police were only human too, and that not everyone in the system acted with malice. The truth was, they had made a mistake, and once the evidence came to light, they corrected it. Rahim chose to focus on the lessons learned rather than anger over what had happened. One important lesson Rahim took from this experience was the power of persistence. Emily's unwavering belief in him had been the key to his freedom. It was a reminder that, no matter how difficult the situation, you must never give up on finding the truth. Rahim had fought for his innocence, and with the help of Emily, he had emerged victorious. In the end, Rahim knew that the most important thing was to move forward. He had been wronged, but now he was free. He would rebuild his life and work towards earning back the trust of his community. And more than that, Rahim would share his story, hoping that others would understand the importance of justice, patience, and never giving up on what's right. As Rahim walked down the street one afternoon, he felt a deep sense of peace. His ordeal was behind him, and the future was once again full of possibilities. He had learned, grown, and fought for what mattered most. Now, it was time to live his life and make the most of the second chance he had been given.